We're here today with Megan Nolan and for the wonderful Ordinary Human Failings book that's coming out in paperback, right?
That's right. Yeah, next month.
It's beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
it must be really exciting to have it out in paperback. And I wanted to ask you, oh, there's so much. First of all, how was it? You've gone back a few times since your book, back home to Ireland, to Waterford, right?
Yeah.
Where you're from. Um, since the book came out. And is it so it would be out over there as well, right?
Yeah, it came out there a little earlier than in the US actually. So it's been out there for almost 2 years. Yeah.
And what is it like going? I mean, because you had another book,
Yeah.
uh, Acts of Desperation.
hmm
And what is it, how does it feel going back as a writer? Is it-
it was really nice with the second one that because my first book is quite like openly autobiographical and it's quite uncomfortable and explicit. So people in Waterford were really happy for me and the book that that the book went well, but it was kind of difficult for them to compliment in a way because it was about such visceral and gross things. And so even though this second book is also very, it's like dark in places and it's intimate in other ways, but it's not anything about my life really. So people are more able to like actually have conversations with me about it without being awkward. So that's nice.
have you done readings in your hometown?
Yeah, I did. Well, we did like a secondary launch in my like hometown bookshop that was really sweet. And then usually I go back. There's like a kind of young person's writing festival every October, so I try to go back to teach a workshop at that most years.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. Is there a difference between Ireland and the UK that you found?
Yeah, in terms of like, well, I think the main thing that distinguishes Ireland as a place for artists and writer in general compared to every other country is just that it's really well funded. So like the government subsidizes way more, has far more grants, has more residencies, all that kind of thing, and they're trialing a universal basic income for artists at the moment. And so it's just like a very nurturing, like in a material sense, like a very nurturing place to try and be an artist. I actually didn't really have that much of a writing practice before I moved away from Ireland. Like I was always writing, but I hadn't really published anything. So I never really got to be an artist in Ireland, which is something that I'm a little sad about.
Well, so what is it like when you go over to the UK and how do they perceive you as, do they welcome you as an Irish writer? That, I mean, there just seems to be a sudden embrace of of this new crop of incredibly talented writers that I mean, which speaks to this is what can happen if you nurture writers and don't expect them to, depend on sex work.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And also yeah, because also when I was in London, I had to, I was working like three different service jobs at the same time as I was writing the novel. And I don't like that was still like a happy and productive time in my life, but it obviously took me many more years to write the book than it would have otherwise. But yeah, in the UK, I guess it was coming quite soon after Sally Rooney had become a big thing. And so I think just like for marketing purposes, people do want to put you in the same bracket for that reason. But that never bothered me. Like I really respect her and all those other people who've come up at the same time. So I'm very proud to be like in their company. As I said, I didn't really have much of a writing career when I lived in Ireland. So sometimes I don't really feel a part of it. Like I feel like there is a scene of Irish writing that I never really was around. So I feel a little bit outside of it in that way.
Yeah, I guess that's we have that in common. Like there's this like stepping stone type of thing. And there I guess it's like, going to Trinity or those universities and you left.
Yeah, I started in Trinity and then I dropped out well, I still, I pretty much dropped out immediately, but I still kind of tokenistically hung around campus for another year. But yeah, I dropped out and then started working in restaurants and stuff like that.
It feels kind of scary to, like, I found out later, oh, there's this expected thing you do if you're going to be a writer, and I was oblivious to that. But it also feels good to find your work breaking through, because the work broke through because of the strength of the work, and not because of, like, well, you went to this university and that university, that you were able to absorb what you needed to from reading, and also from family, which has obviously had quite an impact. I mean, I hear so much from people who that means a lot to, because having
Mm.
access to, Iowa and, universities, that it's rarefied. So, and do you hear from people that are just really grateful to hear another way to get your work out there?
Yeah, and actually that comes up a lot when I do teach young people because, in a way that in a way like their teachers don't really want me to describe the path that I took because I did all the wrong things. Um but I think it's important to like the biggest problem in my early adult life was that when I dropped out and failed that part of my life, I thought that my life was over, and I thought that my life was over for a long time, for like, a good 8 years or so. I was just sort of resigned to the fact that I couldn't be a writer because I had dropped out. And so I think it is important to, I don't know, to tell people who are in a vulnerable, precarious state when they're teenagers that even if you do mess up, like your life isn't over and you can try to start again and do all sorts of interesting other things. But yeah, and so I do also I feel I always I mean, I don't want to take too much pride in being a college dropout, but I do feel good about myself that I managed to do that even though I had failed so completely at the other part of things.
And your father is a writer,
Yeah.
uh, director, playwright, um, and uh, and it seems like you have a very close relationship. What was his reaction when you finally told him?
Well, I think the main source of pain for both of us was that I kept it a secret for so long, and so like I didn't tell anyone until the year had passed basically, and I was just really paralyzed, and I think that more so than anything else was what upset him, was that I had been like, living in this secrecy for the whole year and in a lot of distress and hadn't been able to tell him. Um, so yeah, he wasn't angry or upset that I didn't finish college, but it was just very sad for all of us that I had been like in this seclusion and not revealing anything about it to anyone. Um, and like, he didn't go to college. Nobody in my family went to college, and so it wasn't as though there was a big expectation that I had to, but definitely because I was a bookish kid and I loved reading and I loved to write, like it did seem the natural course for me to take, and I was very shocked when it didn't work out also.
When when you worked at some tabloids.
Mm-hmm. Or I didn't actually work there, but the magazine that I worked for shared a building with the Daily Mail, so I was sort of in the same office.
So, I mean, that definitely puts a spotlight on how class can be exploited, but as your book explores the wretched ways that, well, people's lives. I mean, it hits, wealthy celebrities, but you especially spotlight the way this family is targeted by the media, and particularly by assumptions about their class.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of informed that? And
Yeah, I think like probably from that time that I was in Trinity, it was something that I became more interested in. But and it was also like as you're saying, like the access and the kind of I always kind of think about this in terms of like the economy of second chances, like who gets to have second chances. And that kind of became very clear when I was more aware of class, that there was a certain level of failure built in that was tolerable for people who had these options, and that they knew they would be okay. And I think that that's the main thing that started to strike me is the people who I grew up around who maybe didn't know but learned that if they messed up, then that might be it forever. They might have done an irretrievable mistake that they couldn't come back from. And I think that's a lot what I was thinking about in the consequences in the book, where like where pregnancy, for instance, in a country where it was criminalized to have an abortion, like that was still possible for a wealthy person in Ireland to get an abortion, but it's not possible for a person who isn't. And that was the most striking example, that when I was growing up, it was still illegal. It was legalized in 2018, and so that was like a very clear class barrier, that if you heard about a girl who was pregnant in school and she was rich, then she would be fine because she could go to England. And if she wasn't, then she wouldn't. Then she would have to have the baby. And it's very stark and obvious. So that was a very clear class divide thing. And and then also I think like the character in the book, Richie, who is an addict, like there was just people in my life in Waterford who, I think if they did have more money, they may still have been addicts, but they just would have had, again, like this cushioning of second chances. And when they lost a job, it might not be the end of their whole life, and so on. And so yeah, I think that's really what I started to pay attention to was the people who were allowed to try again.